good American voice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So everybody can still hear me. Let me start off with the introduction. So I'm Peter Moss. I'm a trustee of PeCAN and the lead trustee for the Super Homes project, which we're running as a charity, which is very much focused around helping people to understand how to make their homes more efficient and possibly do a series of sort of retrofit measures to those homes. And I'll be the one initially talking during this this session, and then I'm going to hand over to Patricia, who can introduce herself now.
Thanks, Peter. So I'm Patricia Exley. I'm the project officer for the Petersfield Area Super Homes project. So I know I've spoken to some of you at least about the project and what we do. So yeah, that's it, and I'll pop in later on.
And then very quickly, maybe we could just go around the screen. And actually, why don't we do it in the order that is on my screen, so we don't get confused. Richard, you first.
I am Richard Phillips, live in Sussex Road in Petersfield. I've had a Super Homes assessment some year ago now, I think, which we're still looking at different aspects of, but I'm certainly interested in insulation. So this particular program looked very interesting to me. So I look forward to getting involved.
Excellent, thank you. Andy.
Good evening. Yeah, Peter, thank you for including me in this. I'm based in Titchfield down on the south coast, but struggling to find any like-minded people near me. So I'm sort of riding on the back of the Petersfield initiative, fascinated by the opportunity of using thermal cameras to get people started down that road of trying to improve their home efficiency, and keen to sort of start using it. I've also just finished building myself a blower door as well, which quite a nice gadget to go with a thermal camera. So yeah, keen to learn everything and anything I can about using thermal cameras.
Excellent. Well, we hope we can teach you something tonight. You may already know most of it, I suspect. But anyway, John.
Hello. I was involved with a thermal imaging project in Borden about 10 years ago, I suppose. So I've got a bit of a background in things vaguely environmental, and heard about your project, and I thought I'd stick my hand in the air.
Thank you very much. Janet.
I live down in Waterlooville area, so nearer to Andy than to anybody else. We also have had the Super Homes assessment, and we're looking at it, and we want to look at insulation first. So thermal imaging will be very useful to us in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Duncan?
Hi guys, Duncan Elder. I have no real experience in this area, but a keen interest, and I'd really like to try and help people make good decisions about what they do in their house, how they improve it, primarily driven from an environmental point of view. So keen to get involved, keen to help where I can.
Excellent, thank you. And Philip?
Yeah, good evening all. Very much chime with what Duncan just said. So yeah, I'm on the Rams Hill estate in Petersfield. I'm very happy and keen to help.
Excellent, wonderful, thank you. So why don't we get going with the slides, because I'm conscious we want to try and get this done in an hour, and you may have a few questions as we sort of go through this. So I think best to get going. So Patricia, do you want to share the slides? And then maybe put it, yeah, that's it, excellent. Wonderful. Okay, so we badge this as training for volunteers, although actually it's probably going to be useful for anyone that we loan the camera to do their own house, and perhaps one or two neighbours' houses as well. So not necessarily just people that are actually offering to volunteer to help survey other people's homes too. What we're looking to cover tonight is basically a sort of a quick introduction to thermal imaging, how you use a thermal camera to spot heat loss from a building, how to set up the camera that we have, and we're about to look at buying a second one as well, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of why we're doing that as we get to that point, and then what we intend to do with the camera over the next 2 or 3 months in terms of actually helping homeowners get, I was going to say thermal surveys, but actually we're sort of slightly nervous about using the term survey because it all sounds very formal, and I'm very conscious that we're going to be essentially a group of amateurs with a camera who can actually help to illuminate where there may be issues, but we want to avoid stepping over that line and pretending that we're professional surveyors, which we clearly are not. And then we'll try to leave ample time for questions at the end as well. So on to the next slide. So what is thermal imaging? So basically, there are a number of different cameras on the market, ranging from the relatively cheap, which actually is what we have, to the pretty expensive, and we are very aware of there's a local climate group in Berriton that actually have bought a £2,000 camera. Just for context, ours cost £250, and we went out a couple of nights back with one of the people from Berriton and actually sort of compared the pictures, and you get much better resolution with the £2,000 one, but very, very fortunately we were keen to identify whether there were any issues, and we found there weren't. We could detect all of the issues that were found on the more expensive camera with the cheap one as well. And so we're actually now a lot more comfortable, I think, using the cheap camera to help homeowners with this project. What a camera does, basically, as you would expect from the name, it picks up the infrared radiation and then presents that as essentially a photograph where it shows a heat gradient rather than an actual image. And we've got some examples in the slide deck which will, I think, illuminate this a lot better. But what it's very good at doing is showing where heat is leaking from a building. So if you're outside a building and you are pointing the thermal camera at the building, you can get a very good understanding of where the heat is leaking out. And if you're inside a building, then you can use the camera to actually understand where there are cold spots inside the building, whether it's on ceilings or on walls or on floors as well. So the camera is actually quite useful for both. And we've got a couple of examples of inside pictures as well as outside ones in the slide deck as we go forward. It's best carried out when there is a 10-degree temperature difference between the inside and outside, simply because you get a much better, much clearer understanding of where the heat is coming out from. But I think it's also important to be very conscious of the environment around you when you're taking the pictures as well. I'll give you a good example. I did some thermal images on, I guess it was Thursday night last week in Petersfield. So it was very cold, but it had been a very sunny day during the day. And I took the images sort of around about 5:30 at night. And there was sometimes some heat, particularly in materials like brick, that is held if the sun has been on the bricks during the latter part of the day, and you get a little bit of a distorted picture if you're not careful, just because of that retained heat. So you do also need to be a little bit conscious about what you're taking a picture of, and whether it's really telling you where heat is leaking out, or whether it could be some other reason. I did some thermal imaging of a house at the tail end of last winter, and it was already starting to get quite warm during the day, and literally we gave up on the thermal survey in the end because the walls were just glowing red as far as the thermal camera was concerned, and it was distorting everything. So I think that was a really good example of where it can be quite misleading if you're not careful. The images with the camera that we have a default setting, a default color range, which goes from blue, or well, actually it actually goes black, purple, blue, starting with black as the coldest, and then red, yellow, white, with white as the hottest at the other end of the spectrum. But you'll see, I think, more effectively from a couple of examples that we'll show in a minute. So next slide, please. And there's a couple of very good examples. So two pictures from the outside of a building. And as you can see from the text, but also from the images themselves, it's the thermal scale, the spectrum that's used, is actually very clear. Pictures are a bit fuzzy. That's fairly normal with, I think, a camera that has the kind of resolution that we have, but they're more than clear enough to understand where heat is leaking out. So on the left-hand side, this is a thermal image from a survey we did last year. You've got a house with three things actually sort of shown there. On the top left-hand corner is actually a double glazed window. And as you can see from the thermal range, it's showing a yellow and green, which is sort of mid-range of temperature. Black being coldest, blue being the sort of the next coldest, then working its way through the light blue. In fact, if you're looking very carefully at the slides, you might be able to see the temperature range on the bottom left, well, actually on the left-hand side. It's easier to see on the right-hand image, actually. And it goes from dark, almost black, certainly a very dark blue, all the way up to white at the top. Thanks. I was trying to use my pointer on there and it wasn't clearly helping. So the thermal scale, I think, is a bit misleading. That's one of the things we found out with our cheapest camera. Hang on, let me just admit Ruth. It's one of the things we found with our camera is the actual numbers on the temperature scale don't always make a huge amount of sense, but the thermal images are actually just as illuminating. So going back to the two pictures here, on the left-hand side, top left, double glazed window, in the middle, an oak door with a small window in the middle of that door, as you can see the little white blurred patch there, thank you. And then two single glazed windows to the right of the door. And you can see, I think, several things from that. Firstly, single glazed windows clearly lose a lot more heat than double glazed windows. The ones on the right versus the one on the left, dramatically different. But also, I think it's worth noting that wood doors are not necessarily as thermally insulated as perhaps some of the more modern composite doors that you can get now. And then if we turn over to the second picture, that's another wooden door, and you can see in this instance it's a panel door with quite thin wood panels. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for pointing out. This is actually Patricia's front door, so Patricia knows it quite well. And then there's a single glazed glass sort of down the right-hand side. Now, clearly leaking a lot of heat, and I think a very graphic image of where that heat is leaking from. Going on to the next slide. Similar sorts of pictures, both from the outside. On the left-hand one, you've got a first floor double door with actually some metal bars in front of the door. Obviously, the doors open inwards. As you can see from the picture, the seals on the door are leaking. Other than that, it's probably a reasonably well insulated double glazed door. There's a bit of a heat loss around what I think are metal frames around the edges, and you can see just at the points of the triangle there's some thermal sort of transmission from the inside, which is probably a lack of it's probably the way the door is fitted into the building, using some kind of metal fixture that is causing the heat to leak out. But realistically, what are you going to do about that if you're the homeowner? You're probably going to fix the seals. You're probably not going to worry too much about the other items that are there. But the seals definitely warrant fixing. Moving over to the second picture on the slide. This was a very clear illustration of what a radiator that is against an uninsulated wall looks like. So this radiator was sitting upstairs against a wall. Most of this house was actually fairly well insulated, but that particular wall had not been insulated, and you can see a huge amount of heat from the radiator sort of going through the walls. What would you do about that? Obviously, you can insulate the wall. There are also cheaper measures, like simply putting a reflector plate behind the radiator. It wouldn't reduce or wouldn't remove the heat completely, but it would stop as much heat leaking out through the wall in the way that it is, but very visible. And in this particular instance, you can see bifold doors on the right-hand side, and then on the left-hand side of that same picture, you can see a conservatory where we haven't got the whole picture, but the conservatory joins the building. There is some heat leaking out from that particular point as well, which is presumably something to do with the way that the conservatory is adjoined to the wall. Let's go on to the next slide.
John's got his hand up. Do you have a question, John?
Yes,
yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
First, what is your temperature range? Because I couldn't see that on the slides. In other words, what is white, what is black, what is red, what is green, what is blue? The other is, at what distance do you recommend taking these photographs? Because clearly you've taken them over quite a range of distances, and they seem to, all of them show a similar story.
They do. The range actually is reasonably. It's not particularly sensitive to range, so you can step further away and you'll get a good summary view of what's going on, but you can also get a lot closer, and you can pinpoint specific issues if you want that way as well. Now, I think the temperature scale does get a little bit misleading the further you get away from the heat source. We don't particularly pay much attention to the actual numbers that are shown on the left-hand side. In this particular picture, I think it's showing 12 at the bottom and something like 19 at the top, but it's rather hard to tell. On the previous slide, it was a little bit more straightforward. I think it was showing somewhere between 5 and 10. But I wouldn't read too much into those numbers with this particular camera, because I think the camera is a little misleading when it comes to absolute temperatures. However, the temperature differential that you're seeing there is completely realistic, and is consistent with the £2,000 camera that we were using in comparison last week. So I think it's the differentials that you see within the images themselves that are actually probably most helpful. Richard.
Oh, I think you just answered my question, actually. I was going to ask whether the colours did signify absolute temperatures or temperature differentials. So presumably something that's very red will appear that way if you've got a very low temperature outside, more than if it's the sort of temperatures we have today.
It's very much the differential and the colors. In fact, it's showing very clearly on this picture. So this was taken inside the house.
Okay.
And the picture on the left-hand side, you can actually, the scale is much bigger because I did it with my phone. I think the other ones we did with an iPad, so the scale is just smaller because of the way the picture is resolved by the device itself. But in this particular instance, the left-hand picture is actually a picture of the ceiling in one of my bedrooms. What it's showing is not a massive differential, but you can see very clearly the cold patch on the ceiling, and the cold patch on the ceiling is caused by the fact that the insulation has been peeled back inside the loft by an electrician that was doing some work on a light fitting, and then just didn't put the insulation back. But it gives you a very clear image of where the insulation is particularly substandard in what is otherwise actually a very well insulated loft. On the second picture, it's a little harder to make out what this actually is, but it's again a picture of a ceiling, and the red is the part of, so this is a picture of a kitchen ceiling where part of the kitchen actually extends out beyond the house and has an angled roof where we believe there is no insulation inside that particular part of the roof. So what you've got there is the red piece, or red and yellow piece, is where the ceiling is underneath an upstairs floor. And then you've got the joist and the uninsulated piece of the ceiling actually to the bottom part of the picture. And that's where the extension, the kitchen extension, has been added onto the building. But again, it's a very good indication, I think, of where you can see how insulation has not been done well, and clearly could be improved by adding some more insulation into that space. Okay, let's actually before we go, no, actually let's go on to the next slide. Just the text there is actually covering it anyway. So what to look out for? So the summary of that is basically, look when you're outside of the building. The camera is very good at picking up where heat is leaking out from windows, doors, or walls. The angles you can get from taking pictures outside a building when you're standing on the ground around a building limits you from doing anything other than picking up issues with what is on the walls, doors, and windows. You can't get a good enough picture of what's going on in the roof. And anyway, most roofs will appear very cold because they will have insulation in the loft. And therefore, if you're going to detect insulation leaking out from the ceilings, you need to do it from inside the building. So what does this say? So looking for hot areas on the outside of the house or cold spots on the inside of the house. And I hope that those pictures that we showed are good examples that demonstrate that very well. We didn't actually show a picture of a cold spot on a floor, simply because we didn't have one in our library. But there are very good examples, if you look online, of thermal images where people have taken pictures of, in particular, raised floorboards, where quite often there are air bricks ventilating the gap underneath the floorboards. And if the floorboards aren't covered or insulated in any way, you can quite often get very cold drafts coming up through the floorboards. So the camera will work on floors from the inside, ceilings from the inside. It will also do walls from the inside, but I think it's probably more helpful in most instances to do walls from the outside, although both would work. What you're looking for is these thermal bridges, where part of the building or something is actually allowing heat to escape or cold, I guess, to come in. And I think as I've been talking, I've talked through the issues around draft proofing or seals on doors, insulation, where that could be improved, and so on. Patricia, are we going to show this video now, or?
Yeah, we can do. It's about 3 minutes long.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Bear with me. Let me just share it again, because I don't think I shared the sound.
Excellent.
In this video, I'm going to show you the areas of heat loss in our home with this brilliant bit of kit which Octopus Energy have very kindly let me borrow. I thought our house was pretty good at keeping in the heat until this little gadget has made me realise how many ways our precious heat is escaping. I'll show you 5 areas where we are losing this heat from, and 5 low-cost simple solutions we've put in place to reduce this. If you're new here, we regularly bring you ways to improve your home by making it more efficient, smart and sustainable. And you can subscribe for free to stay notified of videos just like this one. So, keeping things simple, orange, yellow and white colours suggest an area is warm. The brighter the colours, the hotter the area, like this kettle. Whereas dark blue, purple and black mean the colder the area, like this ice cube. Starting on the outside of our house, you can see that it is largely cold blue colours on the brick, which means most of the heat is being kept inside. This house was built around the year 2000 and has cavity wall insulation in place. Clearly our double glazed windows are our biggest source of heat loss. A simple way to reduce this is by keeping your curtains closed when the sun goes down. You can see the difference in the heat loss to the outside compared to not having your curtains drawn. Moving inside, you can see that around the edges of this external door there is cold air getting into the house. Despite the rubber draft seal already in place, we've been able to reduce the amount of cold air getting in by fixing a draft excluding adhesive seal around the door frame. You can see the difference this makes in reducing cold air entering the house here. We've recently installed a Tado Smart thermostat with individual smart radiator valves, allowing us to turn off the heating in unused rooms on an automatic schedule. It is therefore important to keep doors closed on unused and unheated rooms, and will cost you nothing to do. You can see here the difference in the amount of cold air entering the warm house when the door of the cold room is open compared to when it is closed. If you're interested in finding out more about the Tado Smart thermostat, we'll be releasing a video about this, and you can click that subscribe button with notifications so you don't miss out. Our fireplace and chimney, which we don't often use, is a large source of heat loss in our living room. We have made this DIY draft excluder, and you can see the difference it makes in keeping the heat from escaping up and away. Obviously make sure you remove this before next lighting your fire. Finally, we have a hot water tank, and you can see the heat transfer from the exposed pipes and the top of the hot water tank itself. For a few pounds we were able to buy some foam pipe insulation lagging and easily install this ourselves to the exposed pipes. A hot water jacket as a one-off cost for around £15 can save you up to £20 per year, according to the Energy Savings Trust. Again, this was installed easily as a quick DIY project. You can see the difference it makes here. These are just 5 simple, inexpensive ways we've been able to reduce the heat escaping from our home, and there's no reason you can't do the same. If you don't address the heat loss in your home, your heating has to work harder to keep you warm, increasing your energy bills and your carbon footprint. If you're interested in borrowing a thermal imaging camera from Octopus Energy, you can find out some more information about how to do this in the video description box below. If you found this video useful or learned something new, please do like it and subscribe to our channel to keep up with new content we'll be uploading. And feel free to check out some of our videos appearing on your screen right now. To help us all get started, do share in the comments section below what changes you plan to make or have already made in your home to keep the heat in. Thanks for watching, see you next time.
So you can see, I mean, there are lots of other uses for the camera as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be the kinds of things that we were talking about earlier, but those tend to be the things that we have focused on simply because I think we're looking more at helping people to improve the efficiency of the fabric of their homes. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Just a few things to be aware of. Thermal images, if you take a picture, for example, and you're standing in a position where your reflection is captured in the glass, you will get a very good picture of yourself reflected in the glass. The thermal images are quite reflective on certain surfaces, shiny metals, glass, etc., etc. So you need to be a little bit careful about that. We talked a little bit about the lack of accuracy of the temperature scale on this particular camera, but then also there are other issues to sort of be careful of as well. I talked about retained heat in bricks and so on as we were going through. Next slide. Let's get on to the camera itself, I guess. Maybe stop sharing for the moment, and I'll just briefly show the camera that we've got. So the camera that was in the video just then was a FLIR camera, which is a fairly well-known make. We've actually got a camera called a Seek Thermal. Now it comes in a little case like this, and it plugs into either an iPhone or an iPad. Unfortunately, it has to be an Apple device, the version we've got at the moment, but we're looking to buy one that would work with Android devices as well. If you take the camera out of the case, the camera itself is actually quite small. I'm not sure if you can see that easily. Unfortunately, I've turned my own image off, so I can't see myself. But that's the camera, and it literally just plugs into the bottom of an iPhone like that. And as it plugs in, the phone prompts for the app, which is installed on my phone at least, to be opened up. And then it works very much like a camera would on a normal phone. So you use the thermal app, but you press a button in exactly the same way as you would on a typical phone camera, and the pictures get saved to your photo library. So they're very easy to access and very easy to pass on to someone else using either social media or email. So very straightforward. So that's the camera. Patricia, why don't I hand over to you now, if that's okay, and you can take us through the rest of it.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So I don't know if it's worth running the video there with the for the camera. Let me just bring up the share again. So yeah, as Peter mentioned, the one we have at the minute is the iPhone version. So there is a little very short video here. If I can just switch over to the video screen.
Let's do a quick intro to your Seek Compact Imager. You'll need to have downloaded the Seek Thermal app from the Apple or Google Play app stores. Just search for Seek Thermal. The app is free. You can launch the app and then connect the camera, or if you connect the camera before launching, the app will auto-launch on Android showing a permission request for the USB port, or on iPhone it will show a pop-up message encouraging you to launch the app. All Seek Compact Imagers now feature adjustable focus rings to improve the clarity of the image. Rotating the rings should be relatively easy. It won't spin freely, but there also shouldn't be too much resistance. iPhone cameras can be easily reversed to take thermal selfies. Android cameras have a single direction connector, but can also be reversed if you have an adapter. There you have it. This has been a quick intro to the Seek Compact Imager. To learn more about Seek products, visit www.thermal.com.
So just going on from that, there is some information as well on the Seek Thermal's own website about specific tutorials if you need to refer to this, and we'll send out the slides once we've finished tonight, and you can have those links to have a look at as well. So as we mentioned, we're hoping to purchase a version that will work with Android phones, and as soon as that's available, we can let those of you who've got Android phones know how to use it. So in terms of what we want to do in PeCAN, we're quite keen to help as many people as possible to find out if they've got leaky homes, but it's only a few of us, so we're really grateful that you're all here today to find out how you can perhaps do this on your own home, and maybe some of your friends and neighbours as well. We do have a list of people that have expressed an interest in having a thermal imaging visit, as we're calling them. So if possible, we'd like to link you up to do those visits. So we need to find a way of finding out when you're available and when the camera is available, and confirm the arrangements with the homeowner. And if you are going out alone, we'd ask that either you let one of the PeCAN team or somebody at home know where you're going and what time you're likely to be back, because obviously we don't want any problems with safety there. The idea is to take a few pictures of the home. So for example, the front door, the front elevation of the house, and then if there's any particular areas of concern that the homeowner has, so if there's a particular window or wall or something like that that they are concerned they might be losing heat, then we can use the camera to try and indicate if there is a problem there or not. Once you've done the visit, if you can email the pictures to our Superhomes address at PeCAN with the name and the address of the homeowner, and then I can follow up and send those pictures through to the homeowner along with a bit of information about what they can do next. And once you've sent the pictures to us, you can obviously delete them from your own pictures area of your phone or your iPad, whatever you've used for those. We'd also quite like to do some street surveys, just to gather a representative sample of the various types of houses in and around the Petersfield area. So if you have a bunch of friends or neighbours that are prepared to do this, then it'd be quite nice to go out as a team and take a few pictures as you go along the street. And we've got a flyer that we've produced that tells the homeowners a little bit about the project, and if they want to find out what their home looks like, then we can send them through the pictures that have been taken, and again send them through to that Superhomes email address. We're quite keen to sort of compare the different ages of homes in Petersfield. You know, we've got some terraces, we've got some more modern houses, everything's really through different ages that homes have been built, and the standards for each of these homes will be different. So we're expecting to see different things for different ages of homes, and that will then help us to target some of the other work that we're doing, so that we can help these people make their homes more energy efficient. So what can the homeowner do once they have the information from the thermal survey? Well, the first video mentioned a few things, but if there's obvious heat leakage, then they might want to consider some draft proofing, whether that's the tape that was shown or things like curtains. And there's a nice blog there on the Octopus website that gives a number of different ideas. Some of them are easy DIY ideas for people to stop losing heat from those obvious places that they're losing it. It may be that they need to top up their insulation, and the thermal imaging can help direct what areas of the house they need to do that with. Obviously, we're not professional thermal imaging surveyors, so if you're not sure at all what the images are telling you, it might indicate that the homeowner needs a bit more professional support with this. There are obviously professional thermal imaging surveyors who would be able to come around with a more accurate high resolution camera and be able to give them a better view of what is going on with that particular home. And then the other thing that PeCAN can offer is the whole house retrofit plan. So some of you already know this, but we link up with retrofit coordinators to do a survey of the home, and it gives a detailed breakdown of the types of improvements that the homeowner can make. There is a cost for that survey, which depends on the size of the house, but if anybody is particularly interested in taking it further, then I'd ask you to let them know my details or ask them to get in touch with me directly, and I can talk them through what this survey contains and what the cost would be for their particular home. So that's a brief run through of what we're hoping to achieve with this thermal imaging project, and thank you very much for coming along this evening to find out about it. I'll stop sharing now and see if you've got any questions.
So just a little bit more in summary. So we are planning on. I'm not sure where the inference is coming from actually. Whatever that was, whoever did that, that cleared the interference. So thank you. We're thinking that thermal imaging unfortunately has to be done either early in the morning or in the evening, just simply because you don't get the distorting effects of the sun and so on, and the temperature differential is better at that time of night. Now, for those of you that are actually thinking about sort of volunteering to look at other people's houses, what that means is that we'll probably, and what we did last year, which actually worked quite well, is actually schedule someone to actually volunteer for a particular evening, and then typically arrange 2 or 3 surveys for specific houses during a 2 or 3 hour window. Now, that worked fairly well. It typically a period from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. works well. We know that some people we've spoken to would prefer to do in the morning, which is also quite practical. There's no reason why you couldn't do 7 in the morning till 9 in the morning as well. But I think it's not going to suit everybody that time of the morning. So we're assuming evening is most likely to be the more popular one. And obviously with people working, they're more likely to be free in the evenings as well. So the thinking is we would organize a rota with 1 or 2 people per night. We're happy to have people go and do this in pairs if they feel more comfortable doing that. We're also happy for people to go on their own if they're comfortable doing that. We will schedule all of the details and take care of all of the admin. But it will almost certainly require some degree of travel for those people that are doing it. Typically last year, we managed to organize it so that homes were within a 5 or 10 minute drive of each other. But it did require driving between homes. So a typical evening last year that I did would have been a home in Steep, then a home in the centre of Petersfield, and then another one in Harting. So we're talking about those sorts of distances, and I think what we'll try and do is coordinate around the fact that we want homes that are in a particular area, so that people don't have to travel too far between homes. I'm conscious that I think we know where most of you are location wise, but I don't think we have everybody's address. So it will be helpful, I think, if you could just send us your email, sorry, your actual postal address, particularly the postcode, so that we can try and schedule things that aren't an hour's drive away from wherever you're living. Clearly, no one wants to be spending too much time in the car. That would defeat the object as much as possible. We want to keep it local. So that's the intent. And we will, I think, on the first instance, probably aim to have one of us come out with you on the first night, just so that you're aware of how to use the camera and how to interpret things, but then subsequently leave you on your own. camera will be available to be picked up, or we can, in some instances, arrange for it to get delivered to you. But it's going to be those sorts of logistics that I think are going to be, ironically, the more challenging things here. And we'll work through those as we actually sort of get the project up and running, I think. So enough from me. Question. So, John.
What sort of numbers of people do you have on your books now? Petersfield, for example.
Yeah, so we last year, in a period of about 3 or 4 weeks, we did I think roughly 20 homes. We've got about 25 people, I believe, on our spreadsheet at the moment who've volunteered, who've expressed an interest in having their homes surveyed. I would imagine most of you are on that list as well, actually. So it's you and 20 or so others. John, I think your wife actually registered. Yeah. So or someone with exactly the same surname.
Well, there aren't that many of us with the same surname. So
exactly. We're talking about that sort of number at the moment, but we've not yet really advertised this as widely as we would like. Our intent is to start to put thermal images out on social media to try and garner some interest. We're going to put it into the newsletter for this coming week, the PeCAN newsletter, and we're looking at press releases and perhaps articles in some of the local newspapers as well. So the goal is to advertise it more widely, and our hope is that we will get more of a pickup that way. We haven't really pushed it so far.
When we did this project in Borden, as I said, 10 years or so ago, we were looking specifically at the old Rima houses, which were very, very poorly insulated. And there we used a professional outfit who came along and took the pictures about 3 o'clock in the morning. So I didn't actually get to hold a camera. I did actually hold a camera, but I didn't get to use it like that. And they drove past and took a series of pictures. Now, clearly you thought about how you're going to organize this, but what we did there was we were being proactive, taking pictures of the houses and then telling people, we've taken a picture of your house, we haven't been into your property, but we've driven past rather like as Google does or whatever. And this is what it shows. And that did bring quite a lot of interest into the program.
I think
that's if you thought about doing things like that.
I think it's a very interesting idea, and it's sort of the essence of what Patricia was describing with these thermal street surveys.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it has the potential to work very well, particularly on certain streets. As I said on Thursday last week, I was wandering around Petersfield for an hour taking pictures. And there were some streets that were very good, very, very easy to photograph, good access from the road, and you could see very distinct sort of issues with a number of those houses. And then you get a lot of sort of some of the larger houses in particular have hedges at the front, aren't particularly easy to get sort of clear pictures of, and so on. So I think it very much depends on where we're looking and what sort of homes, but I think it would be a very useful thing to do. And perhaps one of the best ways of organizing it would be if we are scheduling individual surveys where perhaps there's a bit more in depth and more pictures taken. Then we could actually also at the same time maybe schedule 15-20 minutes either side to actually take some similar pictures along the street of houses that are in the same neighborhood. I think that would be a relatively straightforward thing to do. Last year, when I was doing specific home images, we were typically taking about 20 images per house. Usually 4 or 5 from the front, 4 or 5 from the back garden. Sidewalls usually were quite difficult because they're usually quite difficult to get access to, because you've got neighbours actually encroaching and sort of getting in the way. But where you can get a side of a property, do that as well. And then maybe a handful of pictures inside the building as well, just to sort of demonstrate sort of some of the issues with ceilings and floors. But so an individual thermal survey for a home would be somewhere in that region, 15 to 20 pictures. Doing what you're proposing with a sort of a street survey would probably be 1 or 2 pictures per home.
That's what I had in mind, yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I think there's a place for both.
Yeah.
Richard.
I was just going to ask about the street surveys, actually. I was wondering actually whether taking photos of houses without the owner's permission might actually raise legal or ethical issues.
It's a great question. I mean, we ummed and ahed about this ourselves, actually, and then decided that Google Maps had done it already. And it's all actually freely available on the internet, so it couldn't be that much of an issue. But I do think it's one of the reasons why on her slide, Patricia suggested that we would delete the pictures after we'd used them, no more than a couple of weeks after we'd actually sort of taken the image in the first place.
Peter, I guess,
right.
I guess the issue here is personally identifiable from GDPR point of view. So if you're not identifying the person and the person in relation to their house, then you're on safer ground, if that makes sense. That doesn't answer the ethical question, but it answers the personal identifiable GDPR point.
I think that's right. Yeah, and I think we're relatively comfortable that an image taken which is anonymous probably for everybody other than the homeowner is relatively safe.
Mm-hmm.
I also took some images of public buildings, actually, which were quite interesting as well. Petersfield Town Council offices and the library, both of which are not particularly well insulated, let's say.
So, sorry, just a couple of really random thoughts, Peter, if I may. One was I was thinking about the old people who used to come around your house with an aerial photograph of your house and try and sell you it, and where there's some parallels here that you're actually slightly different. You know, selling something perhaps, but you're at least going to someone's house and saying, "Here's what it looks like. Here's how it can be better." And the proposition, the narrative is you're going to save money by doing this, etc., X, Y, and Z, even if you're going to do the thermal survey. So there's sort of a parallel sort of thing there. And I just wondered whether in doing that, there's some sort of selling point, which is you will save this amount of money, and whether PeCAN have any of those sort of statistics, because that's the nub of this, isn't it? People, okay, there's an environmental, ethical question, altruistic type thing here, but the thing that's going to motivate people to go out and do X, Y, and Z, or do one of Patricia's surveys is I'm going to save some money. So I'm just wondering whether there's anything that volunteers might arm themselves with, which might help in that regard, a snapshot or a sound bite or something of that nature.
So it's one of the reasons why what we were suggesting was that photos come back through us before they go out to the homeowner, because I think it's sort of putting the pressure on to each of you to not only actually take the photos, but then identify where the issues are is probably a little bit too much.
Quite.
So I think better would be for the images to come back through us, and then we've got access to a whole range of different materials that we've used for various other sort of presentations and so on, which give you an understanding of what sort of savings you can make from doing certain things, from very cheap interventions all the way through to sort of full house retrofits as well. So I think we feel more comfortable giving a little bit of advice and direction, but want to put the onus on you to do that.
Got that. Right.
I think I'd be very chary of offering any sort of money savings to anybody. You might say, you know, it'll cost you X number of pounds to buy a roll of insulating foam or something like that. But to start suggesting to people they're going to save X number of hundreds of pounds by doing X, Y, or Z, I think you're on a very dangerous, on a very dangerous wicket.
I think that's fair. Where we've done it in the past, we've got a retrofit demonstrator that we use when we actually attend sort of fairs and stalls and so on, and any kind of event where there are people sort of face to face. And what that does is it actually shows a very average house and the sorts of savings that you can make by doing certain measures, whether it's sort of loft insulation or wall insulation or floor insulation and so on. So it's very generic, not specific to the individual house, but it gives you a little bit of a guideline. And then we've got, you probably won't be able to see this very well on the screen, but we've got diagrams like this which show what sort of difference you can make to your typical energy use by doing certain things. The big one there is heating, but some of these other things are just what a typical sort of device will draw: gas hob, an electric tumble dryer, an iron, those sorts of things. So you get a feel for where you're actually spending your money on your energy bills. And so I think we can give some guidance, but not too much. Any other questions?
Peter, if I could come in with an observation and one question. First of all, the observation, I've bought myself this Seek thermal shot. So it's basically the sort of the integrated version of what you've been showing us there. I think your choice is better, actually. I mean, this cost about another £150 more, and the screen on the back's not quite as sensitive as a phone touch screen. And also it doesn't really have any other benefits, I think, that you're getting with the phone combination. So I think, just to conclude, I think your choice of going for the module which you plug into an Android phone is probably good. One question is about field of view. You mentioned how looking down the side of a house is tricky because you can't stand far enough back. So I was wondering if you considered any cameras with maybe a wider field of view to help in those confined spaces. So that was one of my questions. And the other question is whether you've had any success looking at the effectiveness of cavity wall insulation. So have you been able to detect, for example, where the cavity wall insulation isn't complete with the wall?
Yeah, so two questions. We've not really looked at wider field of view cameras, simply because we're limited by the one that we've got, to be perfectly honest. But I think it's very difficult. From the houses that I surveyed last year, I mean, quite often you're literally in some houses talking about a passageway between two houses, which is no more than maybe 6-10 feet wide, and getting any kind of sort of effective view from that sort of distance is, I think, quite hard. You can pick up individual points, so if there's specific thermal leakage around sort of quite small spots, then it's fine, but you're not going to get anything around wall insulation and so on from that kind of a view. And then on wall insulation, I don't think we've had great success. We've had one or two sort of areas where it's been very obvious. I think a great example is that one where you had the radiator sort of sitting on the inside of an uninsulated wall. But that was a pretty rare sort of situation. What we tend to see is more leakage around walls. So at the top of a wall, where it adjoins a roof, you quite often get a lot of heat leaking out. We think that's more likely to be just the way the loft space is ventilated, and perhaps heat leaking out through the eaves of the house, if you like. I don't think I've seen any really good examples of picking up particularly bad insulated walls. You can see areas where there is damp on occasions, but I've not yet to see an example of wall insulation. The problem being, I think, that a wall is either insulated or not, typically, and there's no real differential therefore between the walls. The differential you're picking up is between the wall and the ground or the windows or something else around it, and that difference is much larger than you would pick up from the heat leaking out through the wall itself. So I don't think it's great is the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, can I ask you a question? So we have a show of hands, who doesn't have access to an Apple device? Okay, all right, so fine. So Andy and Janet, and Andy, you've got your own camera anyway, right? So you're less of an issue. Janet, what that means for you, I suspect, is if we're going to come and do your home, it probably is easier for someone to come and do it with you rather than loan you the camera. Do you have an Android phone?
I'm afraid my phone is about 8 years old.
Fine.
So I can't put any apps on it because I can't get into my Google account. I've never been able to use it for anything apart from email and text messages and phone calls, and that's all I use the phone for.
Fine.
I do have an Apple iPad, but it's a very old one, and another one which is probably about 3 years old, but it's locked because it belonged to my deceased brother-in-law, and until I can get it cleared so that we can actually access it again, I can't do anything with it. But I don't have an Apple store close to me, so
okay. Fine. Okay, all right. So I think what we'll do is we'll organize for someone to come and help do the survey with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, good. Well, then I think what we'll do next, if you're all interested in sort of volunteering, is actually contact you around what dates you can do. I think starting in the new year now. Realistically, I don't think we're expecting homeowners to really want to have someone coming around, traipsing around, taking photographs of their house during the Christmas period. So we'll probably start off in the second week of January, and contact you to try and work out when you can actually schedule to do either an evening or an early morning. Once we've got that, then we'll schedule some homes around that.
Clearly weather dependent, Peter. I mean, there's no point in trying to do it. Today would be a disaster. Tonight would be a disaster, for example. Last week, we should have done this a week ago.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Our assumption is we'll have quite a few more cold spells between now and March. So yeah, but you're right, it is absolutely weather dependent. But most of the time last year, we didn't have to reschedule because of weather. Any other questions? Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time this evening. We will be in contact, as I said, and and hopefully we'll be talking again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Peter. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Cheers.